Living off-grid sounds like a dream, right? No bills, no neighbors, just you and the peace of nature. But sometimes that isolation isn't peaceful at all. Sometimes it's terrifying. Today, we're diving into 3 true horror stories from people who try to escape society, only to find something much worse waiting for them in the wilderness. Our first story comes from a man named Ben, who bought a remote cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. For months, it was paradise. He spent his days hiking and his nights stargazing. But then, things started to get weird. He'd find small man-made trinkets left on his porch-carved wooden figures, strange symbols woven from twigs. He brushed it off as a hiker, leaving gifts. But one night, he was jolted awake by a tapping sound. It wasn't at his door or window. It was coming from underneath the floorboards. He grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding, and pried open the trapdoor to his small cellar. The tapping stopped. He shone the light down, and his blood ran cold. Scratched into the dirt floor was a single word: leave. Ben packed his essentials and left at sunrise. He never went back to find out who or what was living under his cabin. Next, we have the story of a young couple, Mia and Liam. They built a tiny home on a secluded plot of land in the Pacific Northwest. They were completely self-sufficient and loved their new life. One evening, their dog, Buster, started barking uncontrollably toward the dense forest surrounding their home. Liam grabbed a powerful flashlight and went to investigate, with Mia watching nervously from the porch. He saw nothing. But when he turned back, he saw it. A tall, gaunt figure was standing silently by their woodpile, just watching Mia. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin. Liam screamed at it, and the figure simply turned and melted back into the trees without a sound. They stayed up all night, terrified. The next day, they found deep, unnatural scratch marks all over their woodpile. They sold the land a week later. They said the feeling of being constantly watched never went away. Our final story is perhaps the most chilling. It's about a lone woman named Clara who moved to a yurt in the Alaskan wilderness. She was an experienced survivalist and felt completely at home. One afternoon, while checking her traps, she found a set of footprints in the snow that made no sense. They were barefoot, human-like, but the stride was impossibly long. And they led from the middle of a clearing to the woods, with no tracks leading into the clearing. It was as if someone had just appeared out of thin air. Spooked, she hurried back to her yurt. That night, a blizzard hit. In the howling wind, she heard a voice. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, calling her name. Clara, Clara. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. She barricaded her door and huddled by the fire, listening to the voice call her name until dawn. When the storm broke, she went outside. The only footprints anywhere near her yurt were her own. But on the outside of her door, clear as day, was a single, large, barefoot handprint pressed into the frost. She abandoned her off-grid dream that very day. So, while the idea of living a simple life in nature is beautiful, these stories are a stark reminder that when you're truly alone, you're also truly vulnerable. The silence of the woods can hold secrets we're not meant to discover. Thanks for watching, and if you have a scary story of your own, share it in the comments below. Stay safe out there, and don't forget to subscribe for more strange and true stories. Living off-grid sounds like a dream, doesn't it? Waking up to the sound of birds, surrounded by nature, completely self-sufficient. But for some, this dream of peaceful solitude can twist into a living nightmare. Tonight, we re-venturing deep into the wilderness to uncover some truly chilling tales from those who dared to disconnect. These aren't campfire stories. These are real accounts from people who found something terrifying waiting for them in the isolation. So, dim the lights and get ready to hear why sometimes the most frightening thing isn't what's in the dark, but what's out there in the daylight, miles from anyone who can hear you scream. Our first story comes from a man named Mark. who moved with his wife to a remote cabin in the Pacific Northwest. For the first few months, it was paradise. They had a garden, a stream for fresh water, and total privacy. But then, strange things started happening. Tools would go missing from his workshop, only to reappear days later in odd places, like perched on a high branch or sitting in the middle of their garden path. At first, he blamed his own forgetfulness, but then came the noises at night. Not animal sounds. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping on their cabin walls, always from a different side. One evening, as dusk was setting in, Mark was chopping firewood when he felt that unmistakable feeling of being watched. He slowly scanned the dense tree line surrounding their clearing. Nothing. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling was overwhelming. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him. That night, the tapping was louder, more insistent. His wife, terrified, pointed to the window. In the pale moonlight, they could just make out a tall, gaunt figure standing motionless at the edge of the woods, simply watching their home. They didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, they found a small, crudely made wooden doll on their doorstep. It was a chilling effigy, carved to look like his wife. They packed a single bag and left that day, never looking back. They never found out who or what was out there, but the memory of that silent, watching figure still haunts them. Next, we have a story from a woman named Chloe, who decided to live solo in a yurt in the Arizona desert. She loved the stark beauty of the landscape and the profound silence. For a year, her only company was the coyotes and the stars. One day, while hiking a few miles from her yurt, she discovered a small, hidden cave. Inside, the walls were covered in bizarre symbols and drawings, unlike any native art she'd ever seen. They depicted strange, stick-like figures with elongated limbs and what looked like celestial events. Fascinated and a little spooked, she took some photos and headed back. That night, a violent sandstorm kicked up out of nowhere. The wind howled and battered her yurt. Through the roar of the storm, she heard something else, a high-pitched chattering sound, almost like insect-like clicking, coming from right outside. It circled her yurt, getting closer and closer. Peeking through a tiny gap in the flap, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the flashes of lightning, she saw multiple tall, impossibly thin figures moving through the storm. They were just like the figures from the cave drawings. They moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, their long limbs bending at odd angles. They weren't walking, they were skittering. She spent the entire night huddled in the center of her yurt, listening to the chattering and the sound of something scratching against the canvas. When dawn broke, the storm was gone, and so were the figures. But etched into the desert sand all around her yurt were the same strange symbols from the cave. She abandoned her off-grid life that very week. Our final story is perhaps the most unsettling. It's from a couple, Dave and Sarah, who bought a large plot of land deep in the Appalachian Mountains. They built their home from the ground up, miles from the nearest road. Their only neighbor was an old man named Silas, who lived in a dilapidated cabin about 2 miles down the valley. He was reclusive, but seemed harmless enough. He'd occasionally warn them about the hungry ones in the woods, but they dismissed it as local folklore. One winter, they got snowed in. A blizzard dumped several feet of snow, cutting them off completely. A week into their isolation, their generator died. Plunged into darkness and silence, a primal fear began to set in. That's when they heard it. A faint wailing sound carried on the wind. It sounded almost human, but distorted and filled with pain. The wailing grew louder each night. One afternoon, Dave decided to brave the snow and check on Silas. As he approached the old man's cabin, he noticed there was no smoke coming from the chimney and a strange... The front door was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, he found a scene of pure horror. The cabin was ransacked, and Silas was gone. But on the floor, scrawled in what looked chillingly like blood, were the words, "They're so hungry." Dave ran back to his own cabin as fast as he could. That night, the wailing wasn't in the distance. It was right outside their windows, accompanied by the sound of frantic, desperate scratching on the walls. They barricaded the doors and windows, armed with an axe and a fireplace poker, and waited for sunrise. They never saw what was outside, but they listened to it cry and claw at their home until the first light of dawn, when it finally fell silent. As soon as the snow thawed enough, they left everything behind. Not just leaving society behind, stepping into a world that operates by its own ancient and sometimes terrifying rules. Thanks for watching. If you have a story of your own, share it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling tales. Stay safe out there. Living off-grid sounds like a dream, right? No bills, no neighbors, just you and the wilderness. But for some, that dream turns into a living nightmare. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the woods to uncover some of the most chilling, true stories from people who try to escape civilization only to find something far more terrifying waiting for them. These aren't campfire tales. They're real experiences that will make you think twice about leaving the city lights behind. Our first story comes from a man named Mark, who bought a remote cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. For the first few months, it was paradise. The quiet, the fresh air, it was everything he wanted. Then, the nights started to change. He'd hear strange whistling sounds echoing through the trees, sounds that didn't belong to any bird or animal he knew. One evening, he was reading by the fire when he heard a loud, frantic scratching on his front door. He grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding, and flung the door open. Nothing. Just the dark, silent woods. But when he looked down, he saw deep, three-pronged claw marks gouged into the solid oak. He never heard the scratching again, but every night after that, the whistling seemed to get closer and closer to his cabin, as if something was circling him, waiting. Next, we have a story from a couple, Sarah and Ben, who built a small homestead in the Pacific Northwest. They were completely self-sufficient. Solar panels, a well, a huge garden. One day, while clearing a new patch of land, Ben found a small, old wooden box buried under the roots of a tree. Inside, there was a lock of hair, a rusted nail, a faded photograph of a family standing in front of a cabin they didn't recognize. Ignoring a bad feeling, they tossed the box aside. That night, their dogs started barking uncontrollably at the edge of the woods. When Sarah looked out the window, she saw a faint, flickering light moving between the trees, like an old lantern. Over the next few weeks, strange things happened. Tools would disappear from the shed and reappear in the middle of their garden. They'd hear faint whispers on the wind that sounded like their names. The final straw was when they woke up one morning to find every single plant in their garden had been pulled up by the roots and laid in a perfect spiral pattern. They packed their bags that day and never went back. They felt like the land itself, or whatever was tied to that buried box, was actively trying to drive them away. Our final story is perhaps the most unsettling. It comes from a lone hiker who was backpacking through a remote part of a national forest, miles from any trail. He set up camp for the night near a small stream. As darkness fell, he was startled by the sound of a child giggling nearby. He called out, thinking a family might be lost, but got no reply. The giggling just continued, moving around his campsite, always just out of sight. Terrified, he zipped himself into his tent and tried to ignore it. A few hours later, he was woken by a soft tapping on the side of his tent. Tap, tap, tap. It went on for what felt like an eternity. He was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. Finally, he worked up the courage to shout, "Who's there?" The tapping stopped. The woods fell completely silent. Then, a small child's voice whispered right next to his ear, from just outside the thin nylon wall. "Can I come in?" He screamed, grabbed his pack, and ran blindly through the dark until dawn. He never found out who or what was out there, but the memory of that voice still haunts his nightmares. Living off-grid promises freedom, but the wilderness keeps its own secrets. These stories are a stark reminder that when you're truly alone, miles from help, you're also completely vulnerable to things that defy explanation. The deep woods are ancient, and some things that live there don't like to be disturbed. Thanks for watching. If you have your own creepy story to share, drop it in the comments below. Stay safe, and maybe keep a light on tonight.